He moved without thinking, just instinct and a need to protect. That's what the reports would say later. But George Sullivan knew the truth. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just didn't want to see another innocent die. The spires of Vexera's capital city glowed like polished obsidian in the amber light of dusk. They were beautiful, alien, and utterly unforgiving. George tugged at the collar of his ceremonial uniform, a stifling thing layered with diplomatic insignias and political lies. He hated it. The man had once been special forces, combat boots, plasma rifle, zero hesitation. Now he was pretending to be a security consultant for Earth's ambassador, sipping mineral wine while surrounded by diplomats who'd never seen real blood. His mission was simple: observe, report, stay invisible. But instincts that had been honed in war zones didn't care for rules. And tonight, those instincts screamed. Princess Alatha entered the grand hall like gravity. The room seemed to tilt toward her. The feline grace of her movement, the precise elegance of her markings. She didn't just wear royalty, she was it. George had seen images before, archives, intelligence briefings. But they hadn't prepared him for the raw, magnetic presence of the Vexerin air. Her gaze scanned the crowd, sharp and assessing. She looked like someone who expected danger and was already planning how to outmaneuver it. When her eyes locked briefly with his, George felt it like a static charge across skin. Then she looked away, and the moment vanished. Ambassador Hayes leaned toward him. She's making enemies, pushing reforms, tech exchanges, gender equity. Vexerin traditionalists hate it. Keep your eyes open. George gave a single nod. Understood. And then, everything shifted. A server moved too quickly. His eyes didn't flit like a servant's. They locked onto Alatha's back like a targeting system. George saw the glint of metal under the tray, a blade, curved and ceremonial, but lethal all the same. Move. George didn't think. He crossed the polished floor like a bullet. Shouts rang out. Chairs scraped. Too slow. "Your Highness!" The blade came down, and George took it. The pain was white-hot, slicing through ribs and protocol alike. He tackled the attacker, twisting the blade away with a soldier's efficiency. The world narrowed to motion, flesh, steel, instinct. Alatha's voice called for help, urgent and shaking. Guards surged in too late. The would-be assassin was pinned, snarling in ancient Vexerin tongue. George's knees buckled. He hit the marble floor hard, and then she was beside him, kneeling. Her hands pressed against the wound on his side, trying to stop the blood. Not just a princess, now, but something else, something fiercely real. "You took a blade meant for me," she whispered. "Why?" George's vision blurred. The air thickened with incense and iron. He met her amber eyes. "Just doing my job," he murmured. Then darkness swallowed the light. George woke to a world that smelled of incense and metal. The ceiling above him was carved stone, glowing faintly with inlaid crystals. Strange machines hummed around the room, pulsing with soft blue light. A translucent membrane stretched across his abdomen where the blade had struck. A living bandage, breathing in rhythm with his own chest. He tried to sit up. Bad idea. Pain sliced through his side like molten glass. "The human awakens," a voice said. A figure stepped into view. Vexerin, but older than Alatha. Their markings were simpler, the robe more utilitarian. A healer by the look of it. "You will recover, but not quickly. Stay still." George blinked. "Where am I?" "Royal Medical Wing. Unusual for an outsider. By direct order of the princess." Of course it was. He'd taken a knife for her. That earned him... What exactly? Before he could ask, the door slid open and Alatha entered, flanked by her ever-grim Captain Jarrow. Her ceremonial robes were gone, replaced by something simpler, military almost. Yet her presence was no less commanding. "Leave us," she ordered. The healer bowed and left. Captain Jarrow hesitated. "Your Highness, protocol dictates..." "I'm well aware of protocol. Wait outside." Alatha's voice was steel wrapped in silk. When they were alone, she stepped closer to the bed, arms crossed, tail flicking once behind her, an unconscious sign of agitation. "You You saved my life, George smirked. That's what they tell me. I reviewed the ambassador's security brief. You weren't ordered to protect me. You weren't even supposed to be in range. I was in range enough. Why? She asked. Not like someone curious, like someone suspicious. You had no tactical reason, no gain. That action, her voice dropped, initiated the Theosy. You do know what that means, don't you? I've read the briefings. Some kind of life debt? Her expression tightened. That's a crude translation. It's a sacred tradition, one that binds two lives, physically, emotionally, even spiritually. Your actions weren't just heroic, they were consequential. George raised an eyebrow. You say that like I've ruined something. You've complicated everything. He met her eyes. I didn't jump in front of that blade because I wanted your culture to bond me to you. I did it because someone was going to get stabbed, and I had the training to stop it. That's the problem with humans, she snapped. Always acting first, no understanding of consequence. That's the problem with Vexerins, he shot back. Too many rules, not enough instincts. The air between them crackled. Two opposing forces, equally stubborn, equally scarred. I didn't ask for this bond, she said quietly, and I certainly didn't want it with someone like you. George's jaw clenched. Don't worry, I'm not thrilled either. Not thrilled. They stared at each other. Neither blinked. Then she stepped back. The Theosy cannot be undone. Already the proximity effects are beginning. Within days, separation will cause us pain. Fantastic. You'll be reassigned. As my cultural advisor. He laughed, dry and bitter. I'm not a diplomat. No, she said. You're worse. A soldier without a uniform. A man running from disgrace. The words stung. She saw it, and regretted it, just for a flicker of a second. I read your file, she added, softer. What they let me read. You saved civilians, disobeyed orders, got discharged. He said nothing. Honor among humans is complicated. George looked away. You don't know anything about my people. Not yet, she said. But apparently I'll have to learn. Silence fell, thick as the distance between stars. At last, she turned to go. We begin tomorrow, whether we like it or not. As the door closed behind her, George stared at the glowing ceiling and exhaled slowly. Princess Alatha of Vexara was proud, sharp, and impossibly frustrating. But even in that brief clash, he'd seen something beneath the steel. Fear, pressure, a woman bound by more than tradition. They were stuck with each other. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the worst thing. The next morning, George didn't get the slow recovery he'd hoped for. Instead, he was pulled from the Royal Infirmary before sunrise, issued a formal Vexerin advisor's robe, tight at the chest, itchy at the seams, and escorted through marble corridors flanked by suspicious guards. Alatha waited in the Eastern Strategy Chamber, already surrounded by aides, nobles, and floating holoscreens projecting planetary trade routes. She didn't look at him as he entered. Council session begins in 5 minutes, she said without turning. You're late. I got stabbed yesterday, George replied dryly, and I was nearly assassinated. We all have burdens. Their eyes met. Neither smiled. The session was a blur of rapid-fire arguments between Vexerin elders. Topics ranged from trade tariffs to mining rights on shared moons. George kept silent, observing, until a voice mentioned Earth's proposed technology-sharing compact. The humans wish to dilute our knowledge, Elder Vashi said, markings dark with disapproval. A cultural invasion disguised as diplomacy. George's blood simmered. He glanced at Alatha, expecting her to speak. She didn't, so he did. If Earth wanted to invade, Elder, we wouldn't send blueprints. We'd send battleships. The room froze. Every pair of alien eyes turned on him. Then, Alatha spoke, voice calm and smooth as Riverstone. This is George Sullivan, my cultural advisor. He will offer insight into human perspective. You may not like it, but you'll listen. Shock. Murmurs. But no one dared interrupt again. Afterward, as they walked the palace gardens in the fading light, George kept his distance. The bond between them made proximity strange, comforting, yet tense. "You took a risk in there," Alatha said at last. He shrugged. "I've never been good at politics." "You insulted an elder." "He insulted an entire species." She paused beneath a bioluminescent tree, its hanging leaves glowing with inner light. "I didn't expect you to speak, or speak well. I didn't expect you to let me." Alatha looked at him. Perhaps we both underestimated each other. A silence settled, less hostile this time. Then a boom split the air. Instincts kicked in. George tackled her to the ground just as a nearby statue exploded, scattering shards across the courtyard. Smoke, screams. Alatha rolled free and drew a concealed blade from her robe. George grabbed a palace guard's fallen weapon. Together they moved, not as royalty and soldier, but as partners, covering blind spots, reading body language, trusting without words. 3 masked figures advanced through the smoke, weapons raised. George took one down with a clean shot. Alatha flanked the second, blade striking with precision born from years of training. The third aimed for her back. George didn't hesitate. He intercepted the attacker mid-swing, disarming him with a brutal elbow and hurling him into a stone pillar. When the smoke cleared, all 3 assailants were down. Alatha's breath came fast, her blade slick with blood. George stood beside her, panting, burned along one arm. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "You? I'll live." Their eyes locked. No sarcasm, no posturing, just breathe and understanding. In that moment, something shifted. They hadn't chosen this bond. But maybe it was choosing them. They sat across from each other in the chamber of reflection, a space carved into the heart of the palace's oldest spire. No guards, no holoscreens, no advisors whispering agendas, only silence and the bond. The walls shimmered with ancient symbols etched in silver, their curves pulsing faintly with energy. Between them burned a single flame, blue, steady, unblinking. "The bond has progressed," Priestess Corona had explained. "Truth must be shared. If you do not open the past willingly, it will come for you regardless. Better to face it with dignity." George didn't like ceremonies, or rituals, or opening up, but the pressure in his chest was real, tight, insistent. The same pressure had been building for days. He could feel it in the way Alatha looked at him, like she was waiting. "I'll start," she said, surprising him. She wore no crown today, no robes, just a simple tunic. Her markings glowed softly in the firelight. "My mother died when I was 6. An assassination, meant for my father. I remember the sound of her body hitting the floor before I ever saw the blood." George said nothing. "My father raised me like a soldier, not a princess. He taught me strategy before etiquette. I was meant to rule, but not in the way others expected. When he died, I was next in line. The problem was, I was female, and I wanted change." She touched the markings on her arm, trailing one finger along a curved line that shimmered. "This one means disruption. It was added the day I refused to marry for political alliance." George tilted his head. "That's bold." "No," she said. "It was selfish or brave. I still don't know." The silence stretched again until it wrapped around his ribs. "Your turn," she whispered. George stared into the flame. "There was a mission," he said slowly. "Outer colonies. Civilian settlement caught in the crossfire between Earth and a separatist faction. Command said, 'Proceed.' We had intel the targets were hiding among them." He swallowed hard. "But there were kids. Families. Unarmed. I couldn't do it." You refused orders," she said. "I evacuated them. Got them out before the strike team arrived. The op failed. Enemy leader escaped. 23 soldiers died in the ambush that followed. And they blamed you." He nodded once. "They stripped my rank, blacklisted me, called me a traitor and everything but words." "Would you do it again?" she asked. "Yes." The answer came fast. "Every time." Alatha leaned forward. "You saved innocent lives. That's not weakness." He met her eyes. "Neither is wanting change." Their gazes held. It was strange. How silence no longer felt like a threat between them, but like a space where something delicate could breathe. Alatha broke it softly. You were taught to obey. I was taught to command. But we both chose something else. He exhaled. Yeah, we broke the script. They sat like that for a long time, talking, not as soldier and sovereign, but as two fractured people who had once believed they were alone in their pain. She told him of the reforms she wanted. A world that could integrate, not isolate. He told her of the good men he'd lost, the weight of carrying decisions that no one saw. They didn't agree on everything, but for the first time, they understood. When the ritual finally ended, the flame extinguished itself without a sound. Alatha stood and crossed the space between them. She didn't say anything, just reached out, her fingers brushing the scar still healing along his ribs. He didn't flinch. The touch wasn't intimate. Not yet. But it was honest. And for both of them, after so many masks, titles, and betrayals, honesty was the rarest gift of all. The warmth of the truth-sharing chamber still lingered in George's chest when the summons arrived. He barely had time to change out of his robe before Captain Garroth appeared at his door, flanked by 2 palace guards. The Royal Council demands your presence, the captain said, voice like cracked stone. George narrowed his eyes. For what? Garroth didn't answer. The grand hall of judgment was filled when George entered. Ornate columns, old enough to predate Earth's discovery of space travel, loomed like silent sentinels. Alatha was already there, standing proud in ceremonial robes, her expression unreadable. To her left stood Zuth, his cousin, smiling. Too much. Elder Vashi cleared his throat and began to speak, voice amplified by subtle tech woven into the walls. We have reviewed the progression of the Thiasi bond and its irregularity. It has advanced too quickly, without oversight, without sacred rites. George's stomach tightened. This bond, Zith added, stepping forward, has become a distraction, a danger. The princess must undergo purification to restore clarity, in isolation, at the ancestral retreat. Alatha's fingers curled at her sides. That is not... Vashi raised a hand. It is done. The council has decided. George stepped forward. And what about me? You will remain here, under supervision, Garroth said. Separated. The words hit harder than expected. His lungs felt tight, chest buzzing, head dull. Alatha turned to face him, eyes wide, jaw set. The pain started within hours. At first it was a dull ache in George's chest, like something important was missing. By nightfall, his vision blurred. His limbs trembled. By day 2, it was agony. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. It felt like being peeled apart from the inside. The bond is reacting, said the healer who checked on him. Separation causes deterioration. You should not be apart this long. No choice, George muttered through gritted teeth. On day 3, he collapsed. Ambassador Hayes arrived in a panic, staring at George's pale, shaking form with something dangerously close to guilt. This is barbaric, he said. She's suffering too, you know. Word is the priest had to sedate her just to complete the first day of purification. George clutched the edge of the bed, forcing himself upright. Then help me get her out. Hayes blinked. You're serious? You've known me long enough. Hayes nodded once. Fine. I'll give you what I have. Maps, guard rotations, old service tunnels from the palace to the retreat. But this is off the books, George. If you're caught, I know. Hayes hesitated. You care about her, don't you? George didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night the pain reached a new peak, white-hot and mind-splitting. But he felt something else through the bond. Alatha, suffering, and then a flicker of thought. Not his. Heron, help me. A soft chime broke the silence. His chamber door opened, and a figure stepped in. Cloaked, graceful, silent. Kira, George rasped. Alatha's resistance contact, the one they hadn't dared mention aloud. She pulled down her hood. We have little time. Zeeth plans to kill her during the Ascension ceremony. Make it look like bond madness. Blame it on humans. Trigger isolationist backlash. George stood, barely. Every nerve screamed. Kira steadied him. "Can you move?" He nodded once. "Enough." She slipped a device into his hand. A map. Routes. Security blind spots. "The retreat is a fortress," she warned. "But I know one way in." George looked at her. "Then take me there." As they slipped into the shadows, his pain eased, just slightly. Not because he was healing, but because he was getting closer. And every step toward her was a step toward vengeance. The ancestral retreat was older than the palace itself, cut into the side of a mountain and sealed by tradition older than stars. No human had ever set foot here. None were supposed to. George stepped across its stone threshold, sweat-soaked and bruised from the climb. The tunnel had been tight, jagged, more suitable for Vexerin flexibility than human bulk. But he'd made it. Because she was here. Because every step closer dulled the ache that had devoured him for days. Kira led him through winding servant passages, her voice hushed. They keep her in the purification chamber. Alone. Guards rotate every 6 hours. I timed this opening precisely. You'll have 10 minutes, maybe less. George nodded. The hallway narrowed again, opening into a circular chamber lit by soft firelight. At its center, Alatha knelt, head bowed, her body wrapped in ceremonial white. She looked smaller, thinner, fragile in a way that made his chest twist. "Quite the vacation spot you've got," George whispered. Her head snapped up. She stared. Then, without a word, she rose and ran into his arms. The pain evaporated. The bond surged, warm, electric, overwhelming. Her body trembled against his as if something inside her had been broken and was only now healing. "You're insane," she breathed. "You broke into the sacred retreat." "Never been good at following rules," he murmured, holding her tighter. "Especially the ones that say stay away from you." She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her amber eyes shimmered with something between fury and awe. "You could have been killed. So could you." Their faces were inches apart, breath mingled. Energy hummed between them like static before a storm. "You shouldn't be here, see," she said. "I had to be." Silence. Not empty, but filled with everything unsaid. Until now. "I felt it," she admitted, voice trembling. "Every second we were apart. It was like losing air. Like pieces of me were unraveling." "Same," he whispered. "But worse, because I knew someone was using it to hurt you." Her hands were on his chest now, not pushing him away, not pulling him closer, just resting there, testing, sensing. "I hated you," she said softly, "for what this bond did, for what it took from me." George nodded. "I know. But I also wanted you here. I wanted—" She broke off, jaw clenched. "I'm here," he said gently. "Tell me what you want." She hesitated. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was raw and full of everything they'd swallowed for too long. Fear, pain, defiance, need. Her mouth was hot, desperate, and he answered with equal hunger, hands finding her waist, then her back, then threading into her hair. She gasped against his lips as the bond ignited like fire through their veins. Clothes became obstacles. They moved blindly, feverishly, shedding silk and stubbornness alike. Skin met skin. Heat to heat. When George lifted her, she wrapped around him like gravity, pulling him down to the mats beside the fire. Their bodies spoke first, but their souls weren't far behind. He traced the markings along her side as if reading the story of her life, every swirl and sigil glowing faintly under his touch. She touched the scar at his ribs with equal reverence, as if it meant more than any title or vow. When they moved together, it wasn't just passion. It was surrender. It was trust. It was choice. And for two people who had been denied so much, the act of choosing each other, freely, fiercely, was its own kind of revolution. Later they lay entangled in the firelight, breath slowly sinking, hearts no longer at war. Alatha's fingers trailed lazily down his arm. This wasn't how the bond was supposed to go. George chuckled. "Sorry. Should I have brought a manual?" She smiled, then sobered. "I don't regret it." "Neither do I." She turned to face him fully, expression vulnerable in a way he'd never seen. I didn't think I'd ever connect. Not like this. Not with anyone, let alone a human. I get it, he said. I didn't think anyone would ever see me again, not past the disgrace, not past the uniform. She reached up and cupped his face. I see you, George. And I see you, Alatha. They stayed like that, forehead to forehead, wrapped in silence that felt like a promise. Outside, the retreat still hummed with ancient power, but inside that room, something newer, deeper, was being born. Not just a bond, not just an alliance, but love. They dressed in silence. But it wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the quiet of understanding, the kind that only comes after walls have crumbled. Alatha fastened the last clasp on her robe, glancing at George with something that looked a lot like peace in her eyes. The bond, it feels stable now, like it's no longer pulling or twisting. He nodded, rolling his shoulder where the ache had once been. Feels like breathing again. Kira returned minutes later, breathless. You'll need to move. Patrols are adjusting. Something's triggered a shift in schedule. Alatha turned to George. Before we go, I want to show you something. He followed her through a back corridor of the retreat, deeper into the mountain itself. The air grew cooler, older. They arrived at a sealed stone door marked with ancient Vexerin glyphs that glowed faintly as Alatha approached. This area is forbidden, she said, even to the royal family, but I've always suspected. It holds answers. She placed her hand on the center glyph. The stone pulsed, and the door slid open with a hiss. Beyond was a vast chamber, circular, domed, and humming with dormant energy. Strange pillars rose from the floor, inscribed with symbols George had never seen. What is this place? Pre-Empire, Alatha said. From before Vexara, became what it is now. My father used to whisper that the ancients built more than temples. They left tools, secrets. George stepped closer to one of the consoles. As he touched the edge, it flickered to life, reacting to him. To him. Alatha stared. That shouldn't be possible. He turned, blinking. Maybe it's reading something in my DNA. The console projected a map, Vexara and its moons, but overlaid with something else. Hidden networks, energy fields, transit gates. George's breath caught. These aren't just ceremonial ruins. This is infrastructure, interplanetary, maybe even interstellar. Alatha walked to his side. It's all been here, right under our feet, and no one knew. They didn't want to know, he said. Your council, Zuth. If people found out your ancestors had tech this advanced, it would destroy the purity myth they've been selling. She clenched her jaw. Then we show them. He looked at her. What now? Not just the bond, not just the love they'll try to twist into scandal. We give them the truth, the full truth. George scanned the console again. If I can extract this data, maybe we can broadcast it during your ascension ceremony. Flip the entire narrative. Alatha touched his arm. That moment, when Zuth tries to take power, when he least expects it, a plan was forming, rapid, clear, unstoppable. This tech, George said, still in awe, it reacts to me, like it recognizes something. Alatha's gaze softened. Maybe you were always meant to be more than just my protector. Their eyes met, and just for a second the chaos faded. Hope hummed beneath their feet, ancient, patient, and ready. They left the hidden chamber just before the patrols swept the corridor, heartbeats still synced, minds still entangled. But something had changed. George noticed it first, not in her movements, but in the way her hand kept drifting toward her abdomen. A pause, a subtle touch, as if she were listening for something beneath her skin. Are you all right? He asked, keeping his voice low as they crept back toward the servant tunnels. She didn't answer right away. When they reached a shadowed alcove, she stopped, turned to him. There's something I didn't want to believe, she said quietly, but I've felt shifts in my body, in the bond. George tensed. What kind of shifts? Alatha drew a slow breath. Our connection. It's deeper than tradition expected. Stronger, faster. The completion of the Theosy, combined with everything else we shared. Realization hit him a split second before she spoke it aloud. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was loud, thundering, sacred. George stared at her. Are you sure? I had the priestess test my biorhythm before the purification. They thought the imbalance was caused by the bond. But I knew. I felt it. He took a step forward, then another, until they stood breath to breath. And it's mine, he said. Not a question. Alatha nodded once. There has never been a hybrid between our kinds. Not officially. The council would call it an abomination. He swallowed hard. And you? Her voice didn't waver. I call it a miracle. The torchlight caught the wet gleam in her eyes. But she didn't flinch, didn't apologize. You were never just an outsider to me, George, she said. But now, this child, our child, will be seen as a symbol of union or of betrayal, depending on who tells the story. George reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. Then we tell the story ourselves. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest. I'm afraid. So am I. A beat. But I love you, he said. She looked up. Even now? Especially now. Footsteps echoed from the far corridor. Too close, too sharp. George's grip tightened. Time to go, he murmured. As they disappeared into the darkness, their path uncertain and enemies closing in, there was one unshakable truth anchoring them both. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future. The grand chamber pulsed with ceremony. Hundreds of nobles in their finest silks, arrayed in spiraling rings around the central dais. The high seat, carved from obsidian and glowing faintly with ancient energy, awaited its next ruler. Alatha stood at the edge, cloaked in silver and flame, head high. Beside her, George wore formal Vexerin armor, modified for a human, but unmistakably regal. The silence was thick, expectant. Counselor Zath stepped forward. Today, the daughter of Lurien claims the seat of our ancestors. But before she ascends, I must raise a concern. Whispers sparked like static through the crowd. Zith turned, voice sharp. A sacred bond was manipulated. A foreigner, a human, was involved in rites he should never have touched. This union is a fraud, a threat to our lineage. He gestured to the guards. Seize them. Dozens moved but stopped mid-step. A column of blue light exploded above the dais. And from it, holograms bloomed, footage from the hidden chamber, ancient tech responding to George, transit gates, symbols of shared bloodlines, gasps rippled outward like shockwaves. Alatha's voice rang out clear and commanding. You speak of threats to lineage, counselor, but our ancestors were not pure. They were connected, builders, dreamers. They left this for us, and you chose to bury it. She stepped forward, placing her palm on a panel embedded in the dais. A pulse shot out, activating a projection over the entire chamber. George's DNA matched with the temple codes. Her biometrics aligned. Then, one last image, a pulse from her womb, a heartbeat. Hybrid. The chamber erupted in chaos. Zus shouted, "This is heresy! Fabricated treason!" But the high priestess stepped forward. She speaks truth. The bond is real. The child is real. Zut lunged for Alatha, blade unsheathed, but George intercepted him mid-leap. Steel clashed. George ducked under a wild swing, countered with precision, and disarmed Zuth with a twist that sent the weapon skittering. Try again, George growled. I dare you. Zuth staggered, then was seized by the very guards he'd commanded. Alatha turned to the assembly. This is our future. Not chains. Not bloodlines locked in fear. But evolution. Union. Truth. The chamber stood frozen. Then, one by one, people dropped to their knees. Not in submission, but in respect. The high priestess bowed deepest. All hail Alatha, flame-bearer of the old blood, and her consort, George, first of the new line. 6 months later, the capital had changed. The old banners of isolation no longer hung over the palace walls. In their place, symbols of union, twin stars interlocked, one blue, one gold. George stood on the balcony of the western tower, cradling a baby wrapped in deep violet silk. She was small, impossibly so, but her grip on his finger was iron strong. "She has your eyes," Alatha said softly, stepping beside him. "And your stubborn chin," George chuckled. The baby made a noise somewhere between a sigh and a yawn, then went back to dreaming. Below them, the Grand Plaza shimmered with life. Merchants from Earth stood beside Vexerin scholars. Children of both species played in fountains, their laughter echoing through the marble arches. "It's happening," Alatha whispered. "What we hoped. What we risked everything for." George nodded. "It's just the beginning." They'd named her Lyra, after the human constellation, and the Vexerin word for bridge. And that's what she was. Their journey hadn't ended with Zith's defeat. It had just begun. There had been protests, threats, a handful of assassination attempts. But the truth had taken root. Footage of the hidden technology had shattered the myth of purity. The revelation of Lyra's existence, publicly confirmed, had softened even the harshest skeptics. More importantly, the people believed. The bond had become a symbol, not of weakness, but of possibility. George kissed Alatha's temple. "I'm not great at politics," he murmured. "Still feel like I should be fixing ships, not giving speeches." She smiled. "And yet, you've become the most beloved diplomat in 2 systems. Guess I just had the right co-pilot." Their hands found each other, fingers locked, warm and steady. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the city that once tried to erase them. And now, it carried their names in song. A new era had begun, not built on conquest, but on courage, on love, on Lyra,